Installing EAP can be done a number of ways, and it largely depends on the method that's most suitable for your infrastructure. Historically, people have downloaded the zip file of JBoss EAP and extracted it to a suitable folder that acts as the root directory, and this option is still a valid option in EAP 6. If you're a RHEL 6 user and you have a Red Hat subscription, then you can subscribe to the appropriate channel and download the appropriate JBoss RPM. To install it, you would issue the command yum group install JBoss-EAP6. The downside of the RPM installer is that you really don't have any choice as to where it's going to install it. It'll all be based on the specification defined when the RPM was created. The next two options are dependent on JBoss EAP6 installer.jar. This jar file gives you the option of installing using a GUI-based wizard or an equivalent console-based wizard. The GUI is the default, and so when you launch the installer.jar file with no other options, it will automatically launch the GUI wizard, and you can simply follow along with the prompts. If you pass in the console switch to the installer.jar file, then you'll actually start the installer in console mode, and again it's a wizard driven approach, so you would simply follow the text prompts. For either option, you can choose to generate an answer file at the end of the installation process. That answer file can be reused then in future installations, which is handy if you're planning on installing into a series of servers that are part of a cluster, or maybe a bunch of developer instances. Probably the simplest of all of the options is the zip install, although the RPM installer is very simple as well, but you are limited to being on the RHEL platform, and as I said, you don't have the choice of where it's going to be installed. The console/GUI installer gives you the options of where to install, what to install, and of course the generation of the answer file. So from a flexibility standpoint, this is probably the best installer of the lot of them, and would generally be the one that we recommend. In the next section, I'm going to demonstrate the console-based installer, and following that you will have a lab that you can perform that will actually take you through the GUI installer. But let's take a look at the console installer. I'm now going to demonstrate installing JBoss EAP6 using the console installer. In the student directory you'll find JB248, which contains all the various labs and solutions, etc. So from here you'll find the labs folder and the support directory. If we cd into the labs installs, you'll find that there is the JBoss EAP installer. So to do our console-based install, and for that matter if you're doing the GUI install, we would need to run java jar JBoss EAP installer, and by default it will do a GUI installation. If I want the console, then I need to add the console switch. I'm prompted for the installation language. This language is only used during the install, and as you can see it defaults to English by the 0 in the square brackets there, so I can just hit enter. We're next prompted for acceptance of the end user license agreement, the EULA. I can choose to quit at this point in time if I don't agree with the license or end user license agreement. Alternatively, I would select one to continue. We then need to nominate where to install the product into. You're not at the terminal, so you'll need to fully type in the path. So in my case it's going to be this. OPT is where we're going to install it. Yours will be just student JB248 OPT or home student JB248 OPT. Then we're asked for the administration user details. Admin is the default. This user is the user that has privileges for accessing the management console. You can change it if you don't like admin. We'll leave it as that, and then of course you need to nominate a password and repeat it to set up the appropriate credentials. Quick starts. Quick starts are a set of pre-configured applications that you can deploy with the EAP instance. The quick starts make it easy for developers to learn about the latest Java EE6 technologies that ship with JBoss EAP and learn by example from the quick starts. If you're installing for a developer, it would be a good idea to install these. When you're installing a normal EAP instance or a test instance, then perhaps no, which is the default. You're then prompted for the various components to install, the core stuff first and then the native packs. The native packs will only be prompted for if they're available for your platform. They aren't in fact available for my platform, so they won't be prompted, but for a standard Red Hat install or a Windows install they would typically be prompted for. So now I would normally be prompted for the native packs, but not in this case. The next set of prompts is for the socket binding setup. The socket binding setup allows you to tune the port numbers that are going to be used when the server starts up. These will be the default port numbers. You can typically accept the defaults. I'm going to choose custom just so that I can show you the various ports that are set up by default. We're prompted for setting up both the standalone and the domain. They are essentially the same ports by default, so rather than go through both sets, I'll deselect the domain. So here is the AJP port and the HTTP port, and of course the HTTPS port. These are standard port numbers that you've probably seen with the previous EAP installation. Then we're looking at the management native port here. Most notable with this port setting is the $curly brace value there. If I wish to change these ports that are described this way with the $curly braces as part of the startup process, I can pass in a -D jboss.management.native.port and choose a different port number. The :9 that's shown at the end there is the default should I not choose to change it as part of my starting of the server. So there's a couple that are defined that way, and use the appropriate value to change them at startup. I'll just quickly step through the remaining ports. You can see what they're for there by their names. They're fairly self-explanatory. Do I want the installer to start the server for me at the end of the installation? It defaults to no, and that's fine. It now does the installation and then prompts me whether I would like to create an automatic installation script. If you plan on repeating this same install on a number of occasions, possibly for setting up a cluster or a bunch of duplicate developer servers, then responding yes is probably a good idea. We'll do that so that you can actually see it. As it notes here in the warning, the passwords that you may have specified, for instance the admin password earlier, will be stored in this file in plain text, so just be aware of that. It then prompts for the path and name of the installation script file. In this case it's going to be called auto.xml, and that's fine. So that's the installation done. That was nice and simple. So if we change back to the JB248 OPT directory, you'll see in here the auto.xml file as nominated, and if I list that file so that you can have a look at it, you can see that it is in fact an XML file and does have the various values in here. As you can see, the password has been stored in plain text, so just be aware of that. So that's the auto.xml file. To use it, you would use the Java jar JBoss and at the end of the command you would add the auto.xml file, and this would automatically install without any prompts based on the values that are in the auto.xml file. The other file that's in there is the install summary.html file. This file is basically a summary of the installation options that I took. You can view that in a browser such as Firefox. Here's the HTML version of that file. It's fairly similar in terms of the actual content to the auto.xml file, but of course is just used for debugging purposes. So let's look at actually starting an instance of our server. To do that, we need to run the start script, which is in the bin directory. The start script for the standalone instance is called standalone.sh. So if I run this, the server will start. It'll take a number of seconds to start up, in my case 4 seconds. That's about average. Now that the server is started, I can switch back over to Firefox and go to localhost 8080, which of course was the HTTP port number that we specified earlier, and if this page comes up, we've successfully managed to start our server. If I want to connect to the administration console, I can click on the link here, and typically I would be asked for the user and password, but I've previously been in and it's stored. Firefox has kept my credential details aside for me, so it's automatically logged in. To shut down a foreground instance of JBoss, you can issue Control-C and the server will shut down. So to uninstall your JBoss EAP instance, if for some reason you need to do so, you would typically need to change to the relevant folder. The uninstaller was in the OPT directory as well. It's actually in a subdirectory called uninstaller. When you run the uninstaller, you can run it as a GUI or as a command line console version. The major trap that you potentially need to watch out for is that if you choose to remove the folder, the installation folder, OPT in this case, then you'll lose the auto.xml file and the install summary. If for some reason you wish to keep those, you should copy those out of that folder before you run the uninstaller. So to do that, I would go opt auto to say my JB248 folder here, and there is the auto.xml file, and then I could run the uninstaller. To do that, it's much the same as what it was when we ran the installer, java jar, the directory that it's in, and uninstaller.jar, and this will fire up the uninstaller. By default it'll fire up the GUI. If I want the console version, again I need to specify the console switch, but we'll fire up the GUI instance in this case. It started up off screen, so here it is here. The uninstaller, as I said, if you choose this option here, it will delete this folder and all its contents as part of the cleanup process. So make sure you've got everything you need out of there before you do that. Click the trash can and it's done. Now if I do an ls in this directory, you should see that OPT is in fact gone. Just so that you can see the auto installer working, I'll actually reinstall again. So to reinstall, I want to run java jar labs installs JBoss and pass in the auto.xml file. And in this case it should basically run without any prompts. All done. So as you can see, that's nice and simple. And of course, again, if I wanted to, I could restart the server by changing into the OPT JBoss bin directory and launching the standalone server instance. So done. 3.9 seconds this time. Well, that ends our command line demonstration. You now have a lab in which you'll be doing roughly the same thing but using the GUI wizard instead. Good luck with that.